The countdown is done. So I guess we start our session now. So welcome to everybody who is joining us in our session today. In this session, it's titled Experimental Adaptation and Mitigation Hub. So if you were participating in the plenary session that just ended right now, I kind of already teased our session there because actually we want to have, the title is maybe a bit misleading, and we want to have a nice discussion on different aspects of experimental practices and how they relate to transformation, transformative policy, social innovation, and also really the local policy context and what role the different actors can play in. And yeah, to start off the session, I would just briefly have a few slides prepared to introduce you to our project and to our agenda and what we have in mind for the next 1.5 hours. So I would like to share my screen, and I will check here. Can you see my screen?
Perfect.
Yeah, perfect. So then let's get started. So as I've said, the background of this event today, of this session today, is a research project which is called Siamese, and it's actually funded by the Austrian Climate Research Program, and in the specific call topic of transformative change and governance. So already this call topic was quite a nice fit to the scope of this Transformative Innovation Policy Conference. And our project and our research interests really align well with the discourse on transformative innovation. And I always we speak of a research project with Siamese, but actually it's in my opinion much more than that, because it also really tries and intends to build something up, to form a network or to form kind of a space for exchange and collaboration in terms of transformative climate change and experimentation and social innovation. And that's something that we really want to kind of go into today, and to talk about different avenues for how to facilitate transformation, how to approach it from different angles, and how to support it from an actor perspective. So yeah, so Siamese is a nice acronym that stands for Social Innovation for Adaptation and Mitigation, Experimentation for Transformative Climate Governance. So that already gives you a bit of a frame on what you can what basically is the general approach of the project, or the general interest of the project. And in terms of objectives, we can kind of distinguish between a more analytical objective and a more transformative objective. So as the research team that is working on this project is based in Austria, we are primarily surveying different adaptation and mitigation experiments in Austria. So we really want to see, okay, well, how does the landscape of transformative experiments in Austria look like? What is already out there? What can we learn from them? What are enabling factors for transformative experiments, and how do they generally work, and how do they maybe not work? So there is this concrete analytical and research-oriented dimension of the project. But then we also have this like so-called transformative objective. So we really want to build up a kind of a framework, or we call it an intermediary actor that aids transformational change and governments. So also that bridges the gaps between different, like, I would also already say, silos, like practitioners, researchers, academia, and policy, and that brings them together to work for transformative change regarding climate change and mitigation and adaptation. So exactly, the XM Hub. The XM Hub is kind of should be the output of this whole process, so to say. And the creation of this XM Hub is actually a co-creative process that is already on the way now. So we started the project in October, and this session, this Transformative Innovation Policy Conference session, is already part of establishing the XM Hub, because we want to learn from other experiences on innovative approaches in transformative climate governance and innovative or transformative practices. And we want really to establish this kind of knowledge transfer, and then see how we can shape such a hub, such a knowledge network, such an intermediary knowledge broker, and how we can best establish it so it is a useful space and a useful environment for transformative innovation policy, or more specifically for routinizing, as we call it, experimentation in the field of climate adaptation and mitigation. Exactly. So the frame of this event, there are 3 core dimensions that we will talk about today, and that the different speakers will cover. For one, we have the practicalizational dimension of experimentation and of transformative change, which is linked to questions of agency, changes and reconfiguration of practices, which leads to questions of social innovation and how social innovation shape change and how they contribute to change, to transformative change. And then also the territorial dimension. So what is the specific role of local policy, local governance, and also planning actually for transformative change and for the facilitation or the emergence of experiments. And as a third dimension, the transformative change dimension, which really focuses on how to routinize these experiments and how to get to a way of making sure or grounding the experiments in a framework and a setting that allows to continuously learn from them, and to take out the best practices or the most relevant successes, and further develop them. And the outcome of this, or the output of this, should be in the long term a new actor, as I have mentioned already before, grounded in the Austrian climate change and policy sector. And the main purpose of the new actor would be to routinize experiments and to co-create an experimental adaptation and mitigation hub. And if you hear some screaming in the background, I have to apologize. It's my newborn son. I'm working from home, and he's just 4 weeks old, so you might hear him a few times today. Sorry for that. So then, what is the actual agenda for today? So we are in the middle of the introduction session that gave you a bit of a frame or a context for what we're going to do today. But we have much more interesting and insightful presentations ahead, because I'm very happy that we have 3 speakers today that will share their insights or share some perspective. First of all, Johannes Suitner, who is the coordinator of the Siamese project, who is a researcher at the Technical University in Vienna, and a planner by profession, or planner by academic career, so to say, urban planning, with an urban planning degree and PhD. And he will talk about this process dimension on socially innovative experiments and transformative change, and elaborate a bit more about the Siamese approach as such. Then I'm also really happy to welcome Erika Enquist in our session, who is about to finish actually her PhD project at the Rice Institute in Sweden, and she focuses on the role of municipalities in experimental governance and transformative climate change. So she covers kind of this frame of the territorial dimension of experimentation, and I'm very much looking forward to her perspectives and her insights. And last but not least, my colleague Stefan Philipp from the Center for Social Innovation. So he will be talking about the dimension of agency in social innovation. So how actually actors shape social innovations and how they come into being, so to say. He works at the Center for Social Innovation as a project coordinator, and is also doing a PhD on innovation policy in the health sector at the University of Paris. So without much further words from my side, I would invite Johannes Suitner to start with his presentation. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Wolfgang, for the kind introduction. Hey, everyone from my side. It's nice to be here. And as soon as I'm accommodating to the social platform, I'll try to share my screen with you and give you, as Wolfgang just promised, a little more insight and background about the CME's approach. I guess you can now see my screen. So as Wolfgang just said, the CME's approach is basically about exploring social innovation in climate experiments, all aiming at transformative change. The background idea to starting the project was basically that we agree with the literature that experiments are key for transformative change. But coming from where we come from as planners and innovation theorists and social innovation experts, we think that there still is some blind spots that need to be dealt with in this whole debate about urban experimentation. For one thing, as was just mentioned, I mean, it's evident that when it comes to experimentation, everyone speaks of technology, but too little is being talked about the role that social innovation plays in experimentation. We think that's key. And so that's one of the major issues that we thought why it makes sense to start such a research project on experimentation, because this social innovation dimension is still somewhat missing. Second, and I'm glad that our colleague Erika is going to elaborate about that a bit more, and that we have an expert here on this dimension. Of course, I as a planner as well think that typically when you speak of urban planning, the discipline is somewhat referred to as well-established routine processes, bureaucratic, well-proven, very sort of safe. And the experiment sort of is the counter approach to that. It's very risky and uncertain. And the question, of course, is that when we think of urban and regional change processes, both the sort of formalized planning and the radical risky experiment at some point need to come together. But we think that right now it's sort of an ambivalence between the two extremes, and we want to sort of grapple with that a bit more and understand where those intersections might be between experimentation and urban planning. Third, there's still maybe some missing links between sort of spatial contexts, the institutional context, and more or less the geography behind experimentation. We know a lot about how these processes work and how they can be upscaled or generalized, but there's still very little known as far as we as a team are concerned about what role space and place and territory, and as Wolfgang mentioned, sort of the urban and regional governance configurations play in how experiments play out and become successful. So that's a third thing that we were interested in when we started thinking about this project. And fourth, the last thing sort of that comes to mind is, okay, now we know about all those one-shot trials that experiments are, but how can we routinize and generalize knowledge from all those very specific challenge-driven approaches to transformation? So these four arguments basically made up the overall idea to start the CME's project. Now, what CME's wants to achieve is quite simple. You can put it in 3 sentences, more or less. We want to get some sort of overview and more clarity of what forms social innovation can actually take in experimentation. Now, as Wolfgang already mentioned, we're going to look at Austrian climate experiments, so projects and initiatives that are more or less oriented at adaptation, mitigation, and sustainability. But still, we think there is a lot to say about the different sort of stances of social innovation in those experiments. So that's one thing, overview and clarity of what SI can be in experimentation. Second, we want to choose some of those initiatives at a later point in our project to deepen our understanding of what the processes of social innovation look like in all detail, and especially how they can be contextualized and what these contexts actually do for making those experiments successful. To what extent they have been leveraging the experiments, or they might have been hindering the experiments, have been barriers at some point in time. So the overall evolution of the process, its emergence, the context of its emergence is key to us, and so is its societal impact. And third, and that's sort of the transformative aspect that Wolfgang has alluded to, is we want to support actual governance. We want to support policy and practice in how these actors, networks, and the knowledge of those experiments can be sort of consolidated. So those are the three main goals sort of in the project. Now, it's a nice coincidence that the frame of today's session is somewhat the same as the three CME's project objectives. So there's three things that we want to, or three sort of avenues from where we want to approach these questions and project goals. So we want to trace the actual social innovation process, and I think Stefan is going to talk about that a bit more. To us, different perspectives on agency are key when it comes to understanding how and why practices and interactions can change. And this is what we refer to as the practical organizational dimension. Secondly, a key objective is, as I said before, to better contextualize experimentation. So to us, this has a lot to do with space, place, and territory, and basically the geography of experimentation. Is there differences between experimentation here and there? This is key, and to us, this is, of course, strongly linked to governance and planning. And this, to us, makes the territorial perspective where we think there is still a lot to sort of uncover. And third, routinizing experiments, our actual transformative approach in CMEs is to sort of help develop a knowledge and implementation hub. The thing that Wolfgang mentioned before, the exam hub, is what we want to develop from the knowledge that we hopefully have gained from tracing the innovation processes and contextualizing the experiments. So just two more quick things so that you get a better idea of what we talk about when we say climate or sustainability experiment. To us, we have a very simple working definition here. We say that a climate experiment is trialing and testing novel solutions for adaptation, mitigation, and sustainable development in real social settings. And to us, the 4 R's are key there. They are typically restricted, risky, radical, and reflective. So they are somewhat limited in time and place, in their context and challenge. They are open-ended and sometimes daring trials. They're aimed at comprehensive transformation, and they are sort of learning by doing processes. And to us, from the literature, we feel there's 3 ideal type understandings that all play a certain role in our approach here, like the typical governance experiment, like a citizens' council, the transformative research method, like a real-world experiment that tests some new socio-technical solutions, and the bottom-up civic initiative that authors like Sengers have been referring to, like the food cooperative. Now, in all 3, social innovation to us can play a huge role, and that's why empirically we want to look at all 3 of them to some extent. And second, what's social innovation then when it comes to climate experiments? Well, that's going to be part of our analytical approach in the project. So we need to wait to find out what, at least in the Austrian context, it actually can be. But at least in theory, we define it as a multi-stage iterative innovation process that aims to address concrete social needs by changing social configurations. So we brought along some typical examples that to us make sense when it comes to explaining what these abstract terms could mean in practice. It could be developing a new business model like the citizen solar power plant in energy transition. It could be the new governance mode like the Citizens Climate Council. It could be changed actor roles like a farmer becoming an energy prosumer. And it could be changed practices like private households using sustainable modes of transport on a regular basis. So everything that involves a shift in hierarchies, in relations, in interactions, and even the access to resources to us makes social innovation in the context of such climate experiments. Just to round things up, a nice little picture that shows you what I just told you. Our approach is sort of fourfold. So all those objectives, goals, and questions are put into a nice little research concept, and our approach begins with identifying and showcasing such experiments in the Austrian context, then selecting a couple that we think are sort of ideal type to a certain extent or very important cases from a certain perspective. Looking into these, we try to then better understand the context and drivers, and then explore really the practices, the social innovation process itself, and their potential impact, to then come to the actual transformative aspect of co-creating the intermediary hub. All right, I'm going to stop there. That was a lot of information, I know, but I hope we can maybe discuss one or two of these aspects then.
Thanks, Johannes, for the presentation and the introduction in our project approach. And what I forgot to say before addressing our audience, please feel free to at any time post your questions or feedback or comments in the chat, and we will then take them up either immediately after the presentations, or then in our we have a discussion round later on where we can also get into your comments, thoughts, questions, whatever. So we're really eager also to facilitate the conversation and see what you have to say about the approaches and the things we present to you. So yeah, please really feel free to fill up the chat and bombard us with questions, feedback, and your thoughts and perspectives. Okay, then I would give the word to Erika with her presentation on forms of experimental governance and the role of municipalities.
Yeah, thanks. I will try to share my screen as well. That will be interesting to see how it works. It seems like I have to share the whole screen, right? Is that correct? I tried to share.
You should be able to share the
Do
whole
you see
screen.
it now?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So I will present a little bit about experimental governance and the role of municipalities, or how municipalities are affected by this kind of new governance mode, as I see it. And I had you gave a presentation of me, so I won't say so much about that, but I work at a research institute, RISE in Sweden, and I'm a doctoral student at KTH, the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. And my focus is really much on municipalities and innovation in different aspects. So experiments is just one way of how the public sector tries to be more innovative. And as what my PhD thesis is very much about, is that these are challenging to municipalities and that they might need some kind of organizational capacity for this. And like a red thread, I'm looking very much on public values in this kind of innovation work. So that's my main focus. The cities today are much of test arenas, as you already have presented. So and it can look a little bit different, like these technical solutions of delivery vehicles or drones or things like that, or more social aspects of developing the cities as arenas where you share different things, have this kind of urban gardening in different maybe building spots or things like that. And I would say that is completely different interest and different solutions that are tested. And the experiments appears a bit as, or not just a bit, they are science-based, and it's like knowledge creation of some kind of urban truths. And it seems like it's a way to handle all these wicked problems that the cities are facing. But this is also very much political and including power relations. And this is here I think that the municipalities have a very important role to understand these processes and also handle them. They do political work, the experiments. And if we think about smart cities, eco cities, or things like that, they draw on the idea that experimentation can generate more livable, prosperous, and sustainable urban futures. So that's head quote to bring. The municipalities are defenders of public values. I mean that there are a lot of actors that can work for the public good in different ways. It's not only the public actors, but the public actors have a special role in this kind of collaborations. And municipalities can be promoters or partners and enablers of different kind of experiments, of living lab, or whatever we want to call them. And they also have different modes of governance of how they can develop or how they can influence their surroundings in terms of regulations, for example, or just more enabling or provisioning or self-governing, as Harriet Bulkley have talked about this mode of governances. And the municipalities are one important actor in the cities, but they are not just one actor in just one actor among other actors in these collaborations. They have this other set of norms and values to consider and are responsible to voters. And there is also an emphasis on openness, equal treatments, impartiality, the rule of law, and predictability. And that's the thing that we want it to be. I mean, if I apply for a building permit, we want it to be the same procedure as if my neighbor are applying. So we don't want the municipality to experiment with anything just easy. So yeah, they are handling goal conflicts as well, and are responsible for democratic issues and general welfare. So I conclude this as public values. And if we think about this as different logics, the experiments are creating clashes in this traditional planning within the public sector that is more familiar as hierarchic, or we have this laws and regulations, and now we talk about experimentations that is coming from bottom up, or that the municipalities are trying to open up procedures and processes and facilitate the climate change or governance to change it. So that's something else. And we talk about the public sector logic as built on control and stability. And now we're talking about creativity and test and change. That's something else. And traditionally, the public sector have a very long tradition of balancing between interests. And now we talk about that the municipalities should co-create the future together with other actors. And that is open up questions for public values, for example. So my main work have been on this beautiful city of Stockholm. Now it's very much more snow than in this picture. So it was snow here during last night, but we can pretend it's spring. Stockholm have, like most cities nowadays, very high ambitions on sustainability and smartness, like want to add a lot of smart technology, and it's a lot of collaboration with the academia and business partners in not only like experimental projects, but it's also in collaboration platforms where they sign contracts of that they will try new futures together and things like that. There is also an ambition to test new as well within the organization as in the city. So there are in the policy documents in the policy documents there is texts about how to open up the land for others to test and experiment, for example. And I've closely studied this since 2016 as an embedded researcher within the municipality. So I've been able to follow this quite closely, mainly within the urban development field of the municipality. And I have developed 5 different roles or functions that the municipality has in experimental governance. And then I mean something that's beyond the single lab, beyond the single experiments. So and this is also not like they only have one function, but this is for 5 functions that we have found that they have this function of visioning, where they create a vision or formulate problems and kind of shaping the playing field for others to act on. They facilitate the work towards the visions by pushing the agendas, collecting partners, and coordinating activities and so on. In other types of work, they support by all these municipal resources, such as land or buildings, or giving permits in some way. Then we have this typical amplifying function that we hope so much on within the experimental governance discussion, that we hope that we will show that something works, and then it will be implemented and amplified or scaled in some way. This is a role for the municipality to implement stuff or creating policy, but also to act as a role model for others or as an active procurer. And going back to the theme on public values, they also have a function to be a democratic guardian. They are the one that balancing between interests and see how it works together for the whole city. And this is something that's many of these that I've worked with, these officials that I work with, they have it within themselves as individuals, but there is very few works or few supporting mechanisms within the municipality that supports this. It's like the democratic ethos is within the individuals rather than the organization. So that's what I argue for, to develop more of an organizational capacity for this. And I will not go through this, I think, because I'm a little bit of a time. I'm lacking time here. But it's like it's important to think about who are joining the table, how is the experiments going on, and what issues are targeted, whose targets are in focus. And just to conclude, it's like the experimentation is a new mode of governance that the organizations around us need to develop their capacity for collaboration as well as experiments that ensure the public's values at the same time. So I think I've spent my 10 minutes and go back to you.
The 10 minutes are over, Erika, but if you still have some comments, you can also make them, because we have a bit of a leeway, I guess, in terms of time.
Yeah, but then I can just,
because I would be interested. I would actually be interested in the slide before. So if
okay.
Go, it was too fast for me. I couldn't take my notes.
I will try to go back. I'm still sharing, right?
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah, just because we identified the role or the function as democratic guardian within the experimental governance, and then I wanted to dig deeper into this and understand how are the municipality working with this kind of issue. So I interviewed lots of people that worked with experiments on a strategic level and a more operational level. They are both the ones that's creating policy documents, and they are also people that works with experimental projects. And when I talk to them about who is joining the experimental table, like, do you have processes, or is it a transparent process on how to select what kind of actors that are able to experiment within the city? There is not that much about that. It's more like they experiment with people or other actors that they have worked with before, or it's traditionally large industrial partners, for example, or KTH, for example, is always the university that's have a potential to work with the city of Stockholm as an academic partner, which is not that unusual, of course, but it would be good to think a little bit about who have a chance to develop experimental projects together with the municipality and to experiment within the city, and thinking about what kind of processes is connected to the experiments. Is it democratic? Is it like transparent? Or if you are experimenting with buildings, for example, or where the citizens is involved in some way, are they informed? And is there any processes for learnings from the experiments? Since we think so much that the experiments will be scaled. And what I found was that once you kind of set up an experiment, it's just no thinking about how to inform citizens, for example, if they are indirect involved. And it's a lack of learning structures as well. So the people that are involved are often the ones that creates the learning, and not the organization. Instead, lots of thoughts are on what to do. It's like what we have learned here is that much focus is on doing something, like create actions, and maybe think about also what kind of issues that are targeted, but not always if it always is the municipality, the most important municipal targets as well. It could be also like a mobility industrial partner that creates the targets, actually, and that is quite often problems to implement if it would be something that actually is good. It's some problems to create implementation from it. So that's about it, I think.
Thanks for that additional insight on this,
Yeah.
because I think the topic of legitimacy is something that is quite interesting in the context of experimentation, and maybe something that is a bit neglected, because generally you think about the experimentation and the bottom-up approaches and so on, and you think, okay, it's democratic and it has a inherent legitimization, but I think this is maybe not the case, and this is something that should be reflected, especially in this whole discourse of transformative policy and transformative innovation, because it leads to a lot of also societal considerations of how we change society or want to change society, and who is participating in the process and who is alienated from the process, and how that creates tensions in society that then kind of are in the way of the transformation goals again. So really something that is quite important, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So and I think that it's not the case that municipalities shouldn't develop experiments, and that it's a problem to collaborate with others, but it's important to think about how and who and when, and kind of develop these kind of discussions within the organization.
Yeah, so. Definitely. So thanks for the presentation. I think we can pick up on these topics later on, also in the discussion section, and it kind of also builds a nice bridge to the next presentation by my colleague Stefan, who actually will talk a bit about also this agency dimension in experimentation or in social innovation, and touch a little bit upon maybe also these power dynamics that are part, and how different actors have a certain role and are maybe a more key to experimentation than others. So Stefan, please share your thoughts with us. You are muted.
Thank you. That's a very crucial remark. Thank you very much for the introduction, Wolfgang. And as you already mentioned, I will talk about the role of agency, and actually the role of agency in social innovation, in energy transition, in non-core regions. I will share insights from the project Plaisir, which I had the pleasure to coordinate. It was funded by the Austrian Research Promotion Agency, FFG. It's finished already, and it was led by ZSI, also with the involvement of the TU. It was kind of like the first approach of us to understand the role of social innovation, and this non-technical innovations in the context of regional energy transitions in non-core regions, together with TU, and from that we came to the role of experiments, which we're now looking at it as SIAMEs. So this is a little bit like the mother-father project of SIAMEs. The focus was a regional perspective was taken because we know that technology-driven decentralization of the energy systems is ongoing and is creating new opportunities in regions, especially non-core regions, and they were front runners despite their disadvantages in terms of social capital or infrastructure and scientific and technological knowledge bases, because they had the resources. They had the space for windmills, they had the woods for biomass and so on. So there was an opportunity for them, and they took it and invested in energy transition processes. What we wanted to understand, though, is the social practices and human agency in these processes. Why are things changing, and how things are changing, and how technology is basically then affecting the social fabric, and this relationship between technology and societal change. So our hypothesis back then was that regional energy transitions in non-core regions are not purely technology driven, but that they depend greatly on social relations, interactions, and practices, and their dynamics with the whole transition process. So that these ongoing social dynamics are really crucial in shaping regional path development and regional energy transition processes. How do we capture agency in this process? And then the main thing that we needed to consider there is really anything actors do happen within conditions that pre-existed them. So we have structural and cultural elements that are older than actors, that are shaping the way actors do things, and they are part of the system. So if they want to change something in the system, they can change it by the way they are doing it. But they can also try to change relationships between other actors strategically. That then would be kind of a social innovation. We are building, or analysis was built on a fourfold social innovation process that is building on idea, implementation, embedding, and impact. So that we could look at the whole innovation process basically as not as a linear process, of course, but as a variation of the kind of chain-linked model. Say, okay, first you have an idea stage, you play around with different things, then you prototype, then you kind of try to standardize it, and at some point you will create an impact.
Stefan?
Yes?
Just you're not in presentation mode and we still see the first slide.
That is interesting because I see here stop sharing. I don't understand. Okay, I will try again. Window sharing. So, do you see it now?
Yeah, but not in presentation mode.
That's interesting because I see the presentation mode.
But we see now the capturing agency slide.
Okay. I see what you see. Or do I know? That's not what I need to do. I'm sorry for that. If I'm going on full screen in PowerPoint, apparently it's not in full screen for you.
Yeah.
Even though so you see full screen capturing agency in social innovation right now?
No, not just in the note mode.
Okay, then I will just stay in this mode.
Yeah.
Mode.
Yeah.
I have no idea
okay.
what the technical problem is right now. Sorry for that. And we argue that agency actually is depending on three different aspects, dimensions. One is resources, one is reflexivity, and the third one is relations. And these three dimensions are facilitating the purposeful action at each stage of the social innovation processes. So resources is more than just capital. It's also access to institutions and discursive processes, everything that is an artifact in this context. The reflexivity is the capacity of actors to learn from their own, but also others' experiences of the past, and to reflect on the future opportunities and to identify opportunities for change. And the relations is bringing that together in a reconciliative way in a multi-scalar network and institutional configurations, and then be able to act on critical junctures and events. This is a picture that we made of this. So you see we have agency built on these three dimensions, and we put them in a dynamic process that is starting from the idea to the implementation, then to embedding and impact. That is a process full of iterations and feedback loops and learnings. And yeah, we are studying this process based on three cases. The cases were all from Austria and peripheral regions. One was from the region of Güssing, which is in the eastern Austrian border. It was always close to the Iron Curtain, very rural, traditional development based on natural resources, agriculture, woods, and they really started very early with alternative energy as a means of economic development, regional path development. We have Kirchhoff Mountain, which is in the very south in the Alpine Valley. where they have a long tradition of hydropower, and the Mura region is really in the central Alpine Valley, very narrow valley, with a long tradition in wood industries that were then also built up for more than traditional wood, but going towards energy production based on wood, but also on hydropower. And it's the cases that we were looking at in depth was a citizen power plant in Büssing, where citizens investors were having the opportunity to invest in photovoltaic that were built on municipal roofs. And the interesting story there is really that this was not a means to raise funds, but it was a mean to create an ownership in the local population, because there was an ongoing professionalization, and the local population kind of lost touch with the energy transition, and this was used as a mean to bring the population and the energy transition back together again. And the other thing in Mura was really like they had a huge power plant that they built. It was technologically really challenging, and they built a rich regional network of SMEs and actors that were working together to solve this regional issue. And when they were done, they were really thinking, okay, you know what, we need to do something with the know-how and with the network that we established. And they created this kind of intermediary actor that was kind of institutionalization of this network, trying to sell this know-how to extra-regional investors as a mean of creating employment, as a mean of creating opportunities for local people. And what did we learn from this? These cases was really like that social practices do change the process in regional energy transition, and the active constellations and the new configurations that they are building within this regional transition are crucial for actually grounding technological innovations. Both the PV in Burgenland got a big push through that, and the know-how, the technological know-how, was really embedded in local SMEs in Mura through this process. The whole thing was driven by key actors that really understood the regional context and stood out in regards to their tacit knowledge about the regional development on multiple levels. They knew exactly which funding opportunities were there, what are the discourses, what are the strategies. Some were involved in writing these strategies, of course. And they had some prior experiences. They were involved in projects. They did other things that were really building up their capacity. So they were really knowledgeable on multiple fronts. It was kind of a boundary actors, actually, that were able to bridge regional specifics and energy transition and economic development and European research projects and so on. So they were really reflective. They had the resources because they had the key positions that allowed them to actually access these institutional resources and regional discourses, and it made it possible for them to reorganize actors, networks, and resources in their according to their ideas, which was really striking when you see that, okay, they develop an idea and they know exactly who to call and get behind their idea and build these alliances based on their professional experiences and backgrounds. And they had the relation in terms of bringing everything together. It did not happen in an institutional vacuum. They had access to experts within the regions, outside of the regions, to policy and networks that were extra-regional. So they could bring everything together in these kind of initiatives. Yeah, and so we saw in these cases really that agencies depending on these three things, and the agency was then also really changing the course of this energy transition process very much, because in Burgenland, the end of the first Austrian EU funding cycle ended, and funding mechanisms changed for Burgenland, and they were really depending on that, and so they needed to find new ways of doing these kind of projects that they used to do with EU funds. And in Murau, they were really like able to build new infrastructure. They were able to build new economic opportunities through their entrepreneurial process, and created opportunities that were never there before. Yeah, so that was really new, and you could see lasting effects in both regions. And with that, I would close it. And I'm looking forward to questions that might arise from the moderator or the audience.
Thanks, Stefan. Thank you very much for the presentation. I think we have a nice overview and insight into our different approaches to experimentation now, coming more from the really like actor-focused side of municipalities and policy-focused municipalities approach, and now a bit this kind of social innovation dimension with also like actors from business and from civil society and so on. And I think this gives us a nice like kind of triangle to further discuss what experiments mean in specific spaces and regions. And that is actually the first kind of, I don't see any questions in the chat, so I would just like start on with my questions that I have prepared for the speakers. And I want to really link it to the presentation of Erika and really stick with the topic of the regional, the role of regional actors, be it municipalities in an urban or in a rural context, and kind of maybe start a bit of a reflection from maybe your perspective, whoever wants to start, on what is also the difference between the urban and the rural context, because the project that Stefan presented was really focused on non-core regions, and Erika has really presented us her work done in rather central municipalities. And especially if we're talking about some of the issues raised, these resources, reflexivity, relations, but also the notion of democratic guardian that Erika introduced, I think we really have to contextualize that also in an urban and in a rural context. My question would be, what specific role or what factors are maybe also a bit more fruitful for experimentation in urban and rural contexts? I don't know, maybe Erika, if you want to start and also share if you have some experiences with more rural municipalities.
Yeah, I can start. I sometimes say that I think that the public actors should kind of be in the driver's seats. Like they should think about what they need and develop things based on their challenges. And I think for experimentation, especially, and all this kind of innovation, this discourse of innovation, it's like it is like a lot of stuff are just traveling around it as if it is the right solutions for all spaces and places and so on. And I think that's wrong. I think that all municipalities and all actors involved actually should think about what do they need, what are their most important challenges, and what kind of work should they prioritize and put their resources on. And I think for industrial actors and business partners, it's much more easy because you have your like affair and you know what you want to create and maybe what the most important stuff is. But for public actors, you work with, I mean, you try to establish a nice city or a nice town if you're a more rural area, and you want to develop attractiveness, and you also want to transform for climate change and polarization and other more social issues as well. So I think that's one of the most important stuff to ensure that you work with the most important for your region. But that makes it also difficult because you can't never copy paste from anyone else.
Yeah, I think that also links to this the routinization aspect of experimentation and the context sensitivity of it, and which would actually be the next question already on the table. But I want to give also the space to Stefan or Johannes if they have anything to add on this capacities in urban-rural context discussion.
I would maybe just add that I don't know to what extent this dichotomization of urban versus rural brings us any further in the debate. Because I think the key is that we talked about there is some things that we can say with regard to planning in all contexts and with regard to experimentation in all contexts. And the key to me is rather bringing those two sort of different worlds together. And I think Erika presented very well that there is some similarities, but traditionally those two are like separate worlds, like the very democratic and the very risky and maybe interest-driven approach. So those two don't typically go together. But I think that the rest is a question of context and not so much one that is only determined by, let's say, density or of populations or stuff like, I don't know, GDP or something else that you would pick as an indicator to distinguish between urban and rural. I mean, of course, I'm interested in looking at the geography of experiments in our project and understanding if there is things that sort of might be a hint at where there are differences, but I don't know if the sort of dichotomization of terms is a good way to start it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I completely agree on the critique of the
But I think it's. I mean, sometimes we talk about like urban experiments as if it's only urban, and I write it like quite often, like urban experiments. And one of my supervisors is working with rural areas much more. So he's like, "Is it really urban?" And I think that's important. And I think some of them are like this. I mean, you don't try. This typical high level technical autonomous cars maybe in rural areas, but it's always like it's not far between very urban areas and rural areas. I mean, it's like the connection between them that's interesting, I think. So yeah, but I think that we from the scholar in the scholar debate should think about not think too much about urban experiments.
Yeah, I completely agree with the critique on the dichotomization. Like I didn't want like to distinguish so harshly between these two, like urban rural, but experimentation is possible everywhere. But I think it has to be also in our context of our project. Has to be about also discerning some influential structural or cultural or whatever conditions that tend to foster more easily experimentations or tend to evoke them. And the question would be, for example, thinking it further, how can a space of and that links to what we did in the Siamese in the Plaisir project. How does organizational thinness foster certain aspects of experimentation or social innovation, but how also can, which would be more characteristic maybe of rural regions, and how can organizationally well-developed urban region, also foster these experimentations, but under different circumstances. And what does that mean for routinizing experimentation on a global level, so to say, beyond the dichotomization of urban and rural. So that is kind of the guiding questions that the guiding question that kind of occupies my mind when I speak about these urban-rural capacities. But maybe not. It's only clear in my head, probably.
But I think Johannes, you had a nice. It was like the governance, innovation, technocentric. I don't remember. No, transformative, and then more bottom-up approaches, right? Like these three, and maybe it's there. You can find something there. Where I'm thinking of like top-down, bottom-up. Maybe it's much more top-down. Top-down experiments going on in larger cities, and it's much more bottom-up going on, maybe in city districts in the large cities, but also in more rural areas where people like coming together, and maybe they don't talk about it as experiments because that's some new type of stuff.
Yeah.
So I mean, people have come together and develop new things and learn from it and see what works and what works not, and they kind of adapt it further for a long time.
You touched. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
Oh, go on.
You touched upon a very important subject that we're also dealing with, and that's the one of terminology, because we are framing this so much in terms of experimentation. But I think the first kind of research activities have already shown, and Johannes can surely say a bit more about it, that this will be very difficult to classify a lot of initiatives in this framework of transformative climate governance in this kind of experiment frame, because a lot of initiatives that have experimental character or that do something new, that combine new practices, new ways of doing things, and are maybe created in a kind of shielded space or so, they would never label themselves as experiments. And so this is really also a question of terminology and what do we include in our assessment of experimentation examples, and what do we not include. And I think this is something that will occupy us, or companies, quite a bit during the project.
Yeah. That's when I interviewed officials at municipality, they were like, no, we can't experiment with the tax money. That's impossible.
Yeah.
But we can do a lot of test projects, and we can do trials and things like that. But no experiments. So yeah.
That's very, very true for the public actors, because when you hear experiment, you say, you cannot justify taxpayer because you don't know the outcome. Experiment never know the outcome, and we're not paid for that, so to say.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Actually, this is something that was not mentioned before, that I think can actually help us a little bit when we talk about experiments and experimental governance, so to say, is the question of legitimacy, when that was raised before. But what is actually happening we talk about public actors doing that, is that legitimacy is moving from an input legitimacy to an output legitimacy. And this has severe consequences in the long run of how much freedom these actors have in providing the services. And actually, I did some research in the Swedish context, and I know cases of these social investment funds and so on, where municipalities are actually really, really active in experimentation, so to say, in trying to modernize their services, and actually have the tools for that. Yeah? And from an Austrian perspective, this really looked like so modern, so radical, and I was wondering then, really, like I was asking the people I was interviewing, is this Swedish town so innovative, or is this more like a cultural thing? I think it's cultural, really. Yeah. So that in Sweden, public services are having more and more degrees of freedom, so to say, and that's something that will enable experimentation in this sphere, and it can be a ground bed for innovation, so to say, that comes out of public sector. And another thought that I had about this urban and rural divide is really, like, in the end, I think we're talking a lot about proximity. In the cities, we probably have spatial proximity, but on the rural experiments and these rural cases that we are looking at often is really they have institutional and cultural proximity that we don't have in the cities sometimes. They know exactly the 3 other institutions that are most relevant in doing that, and they know them personally, and they can pick up the phone and just do things. While in urban context, you start to develop an arena where you bring together people and exchange of experiences and so on, and you start at a much lower level somehow. Yeah. So this is also, the framework is very different in the way you can actually engage in developing new ideas. And
yeah, certainly, and I would say that this is one of the most important factors for developing these innovations in different contexts in terms of capacity. But I also wanted to pick up or get back to another thing that I found very interesting in your presentation, Erika, when you kind of showed the 5 different aspects of experimentation. You mentioned also the amplifying dimension as a crucial dimension for the public actors, so to say, and municipalities. And I think this is quite a key notion when we talk about experimentation and about routinization, also about social innovation. And we have already discussed it a bit also in terms of the project, how actually, a lot about the discourse is about on scaling, making it, kind of scaling it out, scaling it up, whatever. But the question is, for example, amplifying would be actually a more suitable term and a more suitable concept to how we can approach fostering experimentation or transformative outcomes, or the production of transformative outcomes.
Yeah, I used amplifying because it's I'm thinking of it not only as scaling, and just because I'm thinking of it as beyond the single the single experiments. So, and it's so much processes going on. Like, for one example could be that the local level needs to discuss with the national level about new policies, for example. And that, that's not the typical scaling, the scaling of an experiment as we think of it. We typically think about trials that are developed and then it will be scaled in some way. But if we think it more like incremental, it's like we try something and then we realize that the national policy doesn't allow it. Then we have to discuss with the national level, and that will take some years, and then modeling it through the governance system. So that was why I used the amplifying structures. But the problem is also that as I work so much with the municipality, and they also have, what they say is that they have really much problems with the scaling and the implementation and amplification in all ways. So what they say is that we don't have the organization for scaling or the organization for implementation or things like that. So it's very much a projectification of experiments, and I think that's highly relevant to think about how I like that routinizing of experimental learnings, because then you move into the organizational learning and the more like the territorial learning, if it's like multiple actors involved. So I think that's one of the most important stuff, to move from individuals and like project groups to routines and all these borings. That's super boring to create routines and organizational guidelines or whatever. but that's, I mean, that's how we develop public actors or all organizations that are bigger than like 50 people. So yeah.
Yeah, and this also, this very much is relevant for us also in the process of, you know, implementing or creating or designing this XM hub that we kind of introduced at the beginning, that we want to have as a kind of output of the project, or some already like a sustainable, you know, container for what we are researching and for what we're creating practically in the course of this research project. So we have discussed now a few things that I think such a hub should be able to somehow support, like this amplifying dimension, or also in terms of this proximity. I was wondering that, like that Stefan mentioned, it, like if it's often just a question of, you know, connecting the different players that don't know each other, and to kind of, you know, provide a forum that tears down the silos that maybe people in climate change relevant policy sectors or business sectors are working in. So I wonder if that could, like these two things could be already like two main components of such a ambitious objective of creating this kind of hub that brings together all these knowledge resources and actors and so on. So yeah.
I guess if I can jump in there, one of the main points maybe is that, I mean, we've been very bold in sort of predicting that the outcome of our small project can be the establishment of something that's institutionally stable, novel, and super effective. But I think maybe it's just sort of the bridge between, right now there is not a lot of, let's say, established modes of amplifying or routinizing those one-shot trials. And I think in the end, it should be something like you just mentioned, Erika, that it should be somewhere established in those routine bureaucratic processes of planning, like those typical planning processes that we are used to, or that we've been used to for the past 50 or 100 years in all cities and regions over the world. And like routinizing what we learn from experiments is something that takes time. And I think the hub could be something that is sort of a platform to develop the knowledge that we gain from analyzing experiments further into and translating it into something that is routinizable in governance and planning. Like, what could the process look like in our city's administrations to help people with good ideas, bringing them to the ground?
Yeah, translation is certainly a key point that you mentioned, Johannes. You know, translation between the different spheres and the different sectors and the different languages of the people are using in this framework. But Stefan, you wanted to add something?
Yes. Now this discussion is reminding me a lot of innovation studies when we talk about the valley of the death or valley of death. You develop a new prototype, something that is promising, but then actually somehow it dies off and never reaches the market. And in innovations, normally you really have this mechanism that will provide the reward, so to say, which is the market. Yeah, you will try to sell something, a new process, a new service, new product, and there is a clear objective, so to say. Yeah, and there is a clear allocation mechanism, a societal one, that will reward the people who carry this idea through this valley. Yeah? And we talk about experimentation in this sphere that is public or semi-public. In regards to climate change, I fear that the additional difficulty might be that this allocation mechanism is actually missing. You know? So this that there is no instrument, there is no built-in logic, so to say, of changing our routines towards a more sustainable behavior. And that this is probably something that we should think about, is not only how these experiments work, but actually what is missing after these experiments.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking that when you talk about this hub, that sometimes when we develop experiments, it's just the typical people that have a lot of ideas and wants to develop new things that are involved, and we miss these people that have information about the traditional structures, about the organizational behavior, and know how. I mean, sometimes you hire a project manager from outside of the other organization just to push through the experimental project. And I mean that the most important stuff is actually to know how it works traditionally, and how you can develop this bridge. So some people are like, yeah, I know how to create experiments, but I don't know anything about, or I don't want to work with this routinizing stuff, because then I'm into the new experiment. So we need all these traditional planners or more bureaucrats. I would say that we need bureaucrats into the experiments to be able to bridge between because I think it's possible to bridge between the bureaucracy and the experiments, but then we need to work together. So and that could also be a way to bridge between, or moving in the valley of death, to actually make sure that you do experiments that are possible to add into. And also that some of the experiments maybe are just this super radical experiments that are almost impossible to implement, just that you want to show something else. But then it should be like strategic decision, and you know that it won't be implemented. It's just a showcase. And that's also discussion. Like, people need to prioritize.
Yeah, I think where you're referring also to your concept of democratic guardian when talking about this, get the bureaucracy into the experimentation. I like the notion of democratic guardian, and I think it's on one hand also this is the problem, that it depends so much on individuals in bureaucratic contexts that are willing to engage in such processes, and that try to create like some small space in their organizational context for this experiment, and that is the translation between the individual efforts to the really administration of it from a bureaucratic perspective, is something that is missing. And yeah, contributing to that would be a really important step, I think.
I think that's just something that we need to be aware of when we get more into the actual co-creation process of our project in developing the hub, is always thinking of these two different languages that we're working with. We're, like Erika just said, we're working with those innovators, those creative guys that have great ideas and just want to do something and change the world, and those people who have those not so fun but very important jobs of being part of the, let's say, representative democracy, who are part of the administration, who keep things going. And somewhere we need to be sort of create the missing link between these two. It's a nice picture. Exactly. I think for me, it just triggered something in my head, and I like the idea a lot.
Yeah. Great. I think that's a nice takeaway from this session. And actually with that, I would come to an end because we're almost out of time. And I don't know, I have not seen any questions from the audience, if there is an audience. But yeah, I'd like to thank all of the speakers, Stefan and Johannes, obviously, for introducing us into the objectives and results of past and upcoming and ongoing projects. And especially Erika for the very interesting insights in your work. I really enjoyed that, and I took a lot of things out of it, really, which are nice and helpful for us. And I definitely think we should stay in touch and further collaborate on these issues and on these topics, because there are a lot of similarities between the things that we have already done, and I see a lot of things reflected in your work with maybe a bit of a different terminology, but I really enjoyed it, and thanks a lot for joining us today in this session. I hope you also got a few interesting thoughts out of it.
It seems like a really interesting project, so I hope you can stay in touch and know more about it.
Yeah, we definitely will. Okay, then thanks guys, and have a nice evening. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.